Money FM 89.3, best of weekends.
Nirmal Ghosh, the U.S. Bureau Chief for the Straits Times, with us on Facebook Live. Nirmal, welcome. Thanks for being with us. Evening time, your time in Washington, D.C. How's it feeling there, besides maybe just a little bit confused?
Well, no, it's not that much confusion, but I think there's a lot of anxiety over what is going to happen because this drama is going to carry on for a while, with all the lawsuits that Republicans are filing, at least a couple of recounts we're looking at. So I think it could go on till, who knows? I mean, even if they call Pennsylvania or Georgia within a couple of days, and they call Arizona and Nevada within a couple of days, and we know who has won, there will still be challenges to that. Because Donald Trump is not the kind of guy to go quietly, right? So It could carry on. And the deadline really is December 8th, which is when all the disputes have to be resolved as per the state guidelines.
And I think that's a good point, right? Many people don't realize this process can carry on for another couple of weeks by law. And of course, individual states have individual requirements, regulations about when their counting needs to stop, Pennsylvania being one of the slower or longer timelines. So when we look at Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, that are all currently kind of in the hot mix, we still may have another couple of days or more before we figure out who it is that's really on top, especially if some of those recounts come through.
Yeah, absolutely. And you asked about the mood. In DC, you have Black Lives Matter Plaza, and you have gatherings there, but they're mainly sort of dancing and singing and whatnot. Nothing terribly serious, although there's a lot of police. Then in Philadelphia, you have a different scene. You have like opposing people outside the counting center. Some saying count the vote, some saying stop the vote. And just I think it was yesterday or the day before that the police on a tip-off found a Humvee and there were two guys with weapons and 160 rounds of ammo. And there's always a possibility that something like that will happen. So there is it's sort of undercurrent of anxiety in this whole thing as we watch this drama pan out.
Nirmal, on that point about anxiety and how things will pan out, what is the mood in Washington towards what is President Trump's clear game plan about alleging allegations of fraud, vote rigging, and the popular phrase at the moment seems to be finding votes. This is the expression we keep hearing. They're finding votes. They're finding Democratic votes. Obviously, Republican senators Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz has amplified what is mathematically provable to be currently a false narrative. How is that playing out in Washington right now? Is anyone taking it seriously at all? Are they giving any credence to it? Is there any fear, any apprehension? I'm thinking more, not so much of the general public, but the civil servants and the government workers in and around Washington. How seriously do they take these finding votes claims?
I don't think so, unless they're part of the Donald Trump's camp, so to speak, right? I think a lot of them have faith in the process. This is a test, obviously, of American democracy and the processes and systems. So I think a lot of them are sort of, well, what can they do? They're resigned to it and they have faith in the process. But if you're in the Trump camp, if you're a Trump loyalist and your future depends on Donald Trump staying in power, then obviously maybe you have a different belief system.
Yeah, indeed. We're talking with Nirmal Ghosh, the U.S. Bureau Chief for the Straits Times based in Washington, D.C. You have covered so many stories across the U.S. You've been covering the election now for probably what seems like 4 years to you. What have been the particular challenges or interesting moments that you've had in covering this election, this presidency?
Well, one of the interesting things is that the devotion of Trump supporters to Donald Trump, it stands out. It's quite remarkable. Wherever he goes, there's tremendous energy, there's tremendous devotion, to the point of blind adulation. So, although I should qualify that, there is blind adulation, but there are also people who say, look, we don't really like him. We don't really like the way he does stuff, but we appreciate his authenticity. We appreciate the fact he keeps his promises. He's not like a traditional politician, and he stands up for America. He stood up for China, and the coastal elites have always looked down on us. We are sort of the flyover states, the rednecks, the deplorables, famously. So, there's a lot of that resentment, pent-up resentment, and here's Donald Trump channeling that. And, standing up for us, and they actually love him for it. So that's one interesting thing.
What's interesting to me on that point, Nirmal, is that in many of those key areas you mentioned, the so-called Rust Belt states, or you used the word rednecks, but certainly where you've got a diminished middle class in America, a lot of disillusioned Americans who went blue to red, those are also the states that saw very high coronavirus numbers. We're just seeing the latest this morning. It's well into the 100,000 plus again, at 1,200 deaths. It's only going to rise. And yet, if you look at most polls, coronavirus didn't feature that highly. It kept coming back to the economy, and job security. What is your take on that and the impact, or lack of impact, if you like, on the global pandemic?
Yeah, this is the thing. It's a very asymmetrical. It's been a very asymmetrical fight, as you rightly say. Poll after poll indicates that Trump supporters and Republicans in general do not have the coronavirus pandemic at the top of their list of priorities. It's the economy, it's taxes, right? Whereas the Democrats have coronavirus, and of course, the economy is important, but they also think about climate change. They're also worried about climate change. So it's very, very asymmetrical, and it's difficult to explain. But President Trump himself sort of reinforced that narrative when he got COVID and he sort of survived and emerged as this sort of hero. I mean, his base sees him as a sort of gladiator taking on the coastal elites and whom he loves to sneer at, who sneered at him actually in his tycoon days earlier. So he's getting his back now. He's had his back on them. So they see him as this kind of hero, and it's difficult to explain sometimes. It's not entirely logical. They're willing to give him a pass on the coronavirus. When you ask them why, hasn't he mismanaged it? They say, well, then another president wouldn't have done much better.
Yeah. And I think maybe sometimes we're all guilty of seeing America as this huge, homogenous block where every race, creed and culture votes a certain way. I mean, what was interesting to me is, apart from the fact that Trump improved his vote amongst working class voters, despite coronavirus, despite the economic downturn, he even chipped away, Nirmal, at the Democratic support among Latinos, particularly in Florida. So again, it's that idea that all Latinos, all ethnic minorities, they all think the same way. Well, of course, in Florida, you've got lots of Floridian Cubans. And I believe that they played that socialism card relentlessly in Florida. And it swayed some Cuban Floridians away from the Democrats. So it's important, I think, in Asia and in Singapore, not to just sweep America under one big brush. It's too complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the Cuban Americans in Florida. I met a Trump supporter. She's a local organizer for the Republican Party. And I mean, she's a lady. She's 70 plus years old. And she fled Cuba when she was a kid, when she was young. And because her father's business was taken over by Castro's revolution. And so I met her in this little office stacked full of Trump stuff with a huge cutout of the president and Melania. And she was standing in front of that with a mask and literally yelling at me through the mask, saying, this is not socialism, it is communism in disguise. So they feel really, really passionate about it. And yes, absolutely, the fear mongering about socialism. I mean, I've spoken to some analysts and they pointed out that someone like Bernie Sanders, by European standards, is a sort of middle of the road socialist.
Yeah, correct. True. Very
but
true.
Over here, it's like he's the devil incarnate. He's going to ruin this lot is going to ruin the country, turn it into a basket case. So, and then cable news amplifies that. Fox News anchors amplify that. And it turns into a very simplistic binary kind of argument. And, if you're sitting there and listening to this and you're sort of struggling to make ends meet, you're sitting in some sort of flyover state and you hear that all this is happening and immigrants are coming. And they've been hearing for some time. That's how 2016 Donald Trump got in, right? You hear that immigrants are coming and all that. I mean, you would feel somewhat anxious, I suppose, right?
Yeah. We're talking with Nirmal Ghosh, of course, the U.S. bureau chief for the Straits Times. Nirmal, when you look at the media coverage across the U.S., we've, of course, got the left and the right, the hard left, the hard right, and then some more centrist ones. How big of an impact has, let's say, far left and far right media had on stratifying the U.S. electorates? People are either on one side or the other, and when we look at coverage on either side, it has been so hardly put to their side, to their audience, that there hasn't been any room left in the center. How much impact does that have, do you think, on where we're at today and the electorate being so split?
I think it's had a lot of impact because, as we all know, being in the media ourselves, I mean, nowadays it seems that most of the public listens to the media that speaks to them, that agrees with them. It's an echo chamber, right? They don't listen to other stuff. So it just, confirmation bias, or whatever the technical term is. And it has a huge effect because then whatever the media says, you tend to believe. Now, one characteristic of the big divide in America, the political divide, is that the both sides hate each other so much that they are willing to believe anything about the other side, however outlandish. So the media and the extremes of the media, of course, the far right, left-wing media, they can come up with almost anything, and people start believing it, and the social media amplifies it. And so it's like, for me as a foreign correspondent, actually, navigating this, and other correspondents I've spoken to feel the same way. It's like navigating a blizzard of information, and you just have to keep your eye on the path, very doggedly to sort of, sort out the noise.
And on that, briefly on that point, Nirmal, I think also the social media element here cannot be underestimated. You have your deeply entrenched camps on Fox News and CNN supposedly leans towards the left. But when it comes to social media, I mean, you just read some of the Twitter feeds or the responses to some of President Trump's comments and nominee Biden's comments. That's where I think you really see the divide. That's where the echo chambers have really taken root. And someone like President Trump has profited because if you look at his comments in recent days, some of which objectively have been taken down by Twitter because they were factually incorrect about the voting process. Despite that, the comments beneath the feed, it's a fix, Democrats are finding votes from everywhere. That only shows, I think, again, the differences now that we have because of social media. What impact do you think social media has played here?
A huge impact, and this is only what we see and consume, right? I mean, if in the campaign, there's micro-targeting on social media. Like one of the things they did with those, Cuban-American Florida was Spanish language social media micro-targeting of the population. So there's a lot of that going on in a very highly sophisticated manner, and it's very, very effective.
Nirmal, thank you so much for your time today.
Sure thing. It's a pleasure.
To listen to more great interviews,